Hello, everyone. This is the Utah State University Statesman. My name is Michael Popa, and we are here today with Dr. Daniel Cottam, who is running as the Utah gubernatorial candidate for the Libertarian Party. Today, we're going to be asking Dr. Cottam questions that we think our student body at Utah State would like to know about. Thank you, Dr. Cottam, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. I think one of the biggest questions that a lot of people are going to ask for any candidate is, why are you choosing to run, especially right now?
The thing that I'm choosing to run on right now is the first thing is that I really felt the state's response to the pandemic was really anemic. And I published lots of papers. Even though I'm not at an academic institution, I'm very active in academic practice. So I've published a lot of papers with these models. And I realized that the state has done a really poor job about this and a poor job of representing freedom and education. And I said, I need to get into this and let my voice be heard.
Gotcha. And I've got a bunch of questions about how the state handled COVID, but before we get into some of the more platform questions, I want to ask you more about you. So where do your libertarian views come from? I know a lot of people tend to sort of fall in line with the Democrat or Republican Party just because the wider base, and it's really interesting to see someone like you run for a platform underneath the Libertarian Party. So where do your views arise from?
You know, it's funny. I was this way, and I always felt in personal responsibility and freedom ever since I was a young kid. And I just remember having the conversations with my dad when I was young, and he said, you know, you need to register for the draft. And I was like, Dad, if I register for the draft, they're going to have an excuse to send me to go out and kill people. And I really don't believe in this. This is just wrong. And, you know, the problem is that I didn't know what a libertarian was until later in life. And as I grew older, I realized that I wasn't a Republican. And it took me a long time to figure this out. When I was raised in Texas, I literally didn't know a Democrat. There was just nobody around where I lived. And it became very, I had a hard time divorcing myself from that identity as a Republican. So I sympathize with people who feel like, oh, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. But when you talk to them, whether it's on the social liberty side or on the fiscal side, you realize that most people have an identity problem, but they don't have a political problem. And so what I mean by that is that they really identify with libertarian beliefs and principles, but they're stuck with their identity in a party political platform. And so the goal is to give people a choice, which is we always feel is important, and that's why I'm running.
Gotcha. Excellent. Moving on, how has faith transformed you in your views, and does it play a role in your politics, or do you try and keep faith and politics separate?
Well, you know, I always feel, and I really believe this, that when you mix religion and politics, it hurts religion. It always hurts religion. And so if you ask me how they interplay, not very much at all. You know, there's some piece of belief that you will acquire as whatever religion you belong to. But in terms of like how it would operate in a day-to-day administration, it's like almost not at all. I can't imagine how it would, because that very reason, if you mix politics and religion, your religion will always suffer.
Something I found too is that when trying to communicate with people different ideas, like you said, whether it be about social policies or fiscal policies, everybody can relate to logic and facts. So when you try and relate to something subjective and personal like religion and emotion, then that's where you get into the gray area. Not everybody can see your side. So I totally get what you mean there. So how do you plan to relate to and get the attention of such a young and religious population such as Utah?
Well, you know, the thing about it is that there's the young and religious population, but we have two populations. We have young and secular and young and religious. And I'm not trying to differentiate, but so many young people are moving to Utah because of the outdoors opportunities and because we have a huge banking sector and we have a huge tech sector. So these people are coming, and they don't share the faith tradition of the main people and the main population that's been here forever. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that you can't appeal to people along religious lines. You have to appeal on principle lines and then let people come. And that goes back to the thing is that I'm not trying to run a faith-based campaign or a religious-based campaign or a secular campaign. I believe the state should be blind to that, right? The state should never care what religion you belong to. It should never care what color your skin is. It should never care what your sexual orientation is. And people who are religious and understand this should really get in line in terms of not understanding this, because every religious sect has a history in its background of persecution, right? And tolerance is always the way forward, and religion is always best when it's separated. And so I'm not trying to appeal to a faith base, or I'm trying to appeal to principles.
Gotcha. So I understand that you're a doctor and that you've been at the very far forefront of some bariatric and gastric surgeries. I remember watching your video earlier today and reading through some of your work, and I was very impressed. And honestly, you're a bit of an inspiration now. I myself want to go into orthopedic surgery, so it was great to sort of see and have the opportunity to talk to somebody that's been in a similar field. Along that note, how has medicine and practicing in the medical field added to or changed your political views?
You know, the one thing that I've learned from medicine is that I've been very innovative with, oh, that's my family. Okay. One of the things that I've learned is that, and it's so libertarian, I've brought out procedures that have gone from nothing to one of the standards of the world. And I've been around teaching all over the world. And what I've found is that sometimes you have a great idea and you try to promote it, and you realize that people are looking at you skeptically. That doesn't mean you force them to do what you want them to do. That means you have to go back and look at what are the problems with your argument and reformulate it, or maybe do some more research. And what I view as the biggest problem with government in general, especially in the pandemic, is they want to force us to do things without educating us, right? You need to do this, you must do this. And everyone has looked and said, why? And the why is never coming. So that's the biggest thing that I think medicine has influenced me. The other thing that I also have found with medicine is that the free market, when it's been tried in medicine and everywhere else, delivers cheaper, better products. And what I found is that, especially in my field, bariatric surgery, we've delivered this. I mean, the prices for our procedures keep getting less and less, and the procedures keep getting better and better. And this is all without direction from the federal government or the state government. And if we let the markets work, our healthcare will also get better and cheaper as well. But they have to let markets work, which is what we're not doing now so much.
Yeah. So sort of going to the root of some of these beliefs, I know a lot of people can be confused or unsure of what it means to be a libertarian. A lot of people can understand what a Democrat is and understand what a Republican is, but when you get into some of the other parties like the Libertarian Party or the Tea Party or the Green Party, they can sort of find it difficult to delineate between each of them. So what are some of the fundamental principles of libertarianism and classical liberalism that you find are most critical?
I think the biggest thing is do no harm. And what I mean by that from a medical perspective and translating this is that it's the non-aggression principle. And this really functions on a macro for the state when you're a libertarian talking about interventions in foreign wars and all these other things. But on the individual level, this is what brings to life all these wars that we've been going through on the culture wars, meaning that, let's say, and I'm just going to pick on Utah, for example, we never wanted to let gay people get married, right? But listen, that did no harm to your heterosexual then. So why are you involved in their thing? I could take it one step further. Why is the state even involved in a heterosexual marriage? Meaning, why do you need a license to get married? What does the state have to do with that, right? So the principles of libertarian is if the state doesn't need to be involved in something, it should let people make their decisions themselves, okay? And then this corollary to that is you can't legislate away stupidity. And people need to be allowed to make their own mistakes, right? So I'll give you a great example of this. There is a baker in Colorado who, for reasons beyond me, doesn't want to sell a cake to a gay couple, right? And if I was in Colorado, I would be asking to start a cake shop to make cakes for gay couples. I mean, honestly, if the guy's that dumb, okay, but you can't make him like gay people. You can't make him make the cake. So people have to be allowed to be stupid and make mistakes. And so that's the accepting the cost of freedom. And most people think they want to force everyone to do something that doesn't actually help anyone. It just makes people bitter and decreases the partisan line. So if you had to say, number one principle is freedom of personal agency and responsibility. And number two is the non-aggression principle. So, and number three is get the state out of our lives and out of our businesses.
So along those same lines, where you say getting the state out of, individual business, I understand that libertarians have this sort of stereotype of being the anarchical pothead frat brothers. And how do you delineate between limited government and no government at all? And how do you sort of clear the air for people that are really confused about what the difference between limited government is and having no government at all?
Well, there are anarchists within the Libertarian Party, just like there are conservatives and liberals within the Republican and Democratic Party and socialists and every manner of ist out there. And so Libertarian Party is no different. So I would categorize myself as, I guess I would call it a state capacity libertarianism, meaning that there is a role for the state to play. There perhaps is a way to do it, which I haven't thought about, in an anarchist type of fashion without any state or any actors. But right now I can't conceive of that. So what I'm saying to that is that I believe in libertarianism with a fully functional court system. I believe in libertarian with a fully functioning police. I believe in libertarian that has prisons. I believe in a libertarian that allows people to join associations together in, neighborhood associations or whatever. So this isn't a one absolute free-for-all. One of the tenets of libertarians is that people will join associations all on their own and make government organizations that work for them. But the point is that you have to be able to join those freely and leave those freely, okay? So I wouldn't get up and say, like there was a presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party that said the first thing he does when he gets elected president, he's dissolving the US government. Well, that's kind of silly, right? I can't imagine that. I'm a libertarian that believes that the world is not all black and white, in the sense that not all people are good. We know this. And we have to protect ourselves from those people. So that's why you still need a functional court system, a functional police system. You may not conceptualize it the way we're doing it right now, because I would tell you policing in Europe is much different than in the United States. But the point is that there needs to be something out there, because not everyone follows the rules, and we have to have a way to deal with those ideals, right?
Yeah, so just to clarify maybe a little bit, do you think titling yourself as a libertarian, you think you would also title yourself as maybe a constitutionalist, as far as delegating powers of the government goes, limiting it to what's specifically in the Utah and the United States Constitution?
Yes, I mean, I believe that people, and as a libertarian, I believe that people, like I said, have the right to come together and decide what laws they should be governed by, but they should limit it to those. And what we've seen, both on the state level and on the national level, there's the tendency of both Republicans and Democrats to really expand on those and create powers out of thin air. And that always really troubles us as libertarians, because we're like, government should be cheaper and smaller, and we would all be richer and better off. And everyone would. And the biggest message that I always bring to people is that libertarian is about the poorest people among us, not the richest people among us. And people always assume it's the opposite. But you look at the free market principles, and they always lift people at the bottom up quicker than government intervention. And, libertarian is classically about the small person striving to do their own business and get the government out of the way so they can be successful. It's not about the giant corporations. And the reason why I say this is giant corporations can function in any environment, Republican, Democrat, because they have enough money to pay those people off. All you do is have to look at the budget for advocacy in Capitol Hill of whatever large companies say. They'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on lobbyists, right? In Utah and nationally. And, the libertarian is just about the opposite. It's about the person who wants to braid hair in their house in West Valley, without the state requiring them to get a license, right? And so it's about the little people, not the big people. And that's what the biggest thing people don't understand about libertarianism. It's actually about the least among us, not the big companies. And they always think, oh, you just want to make all the money and keep it all to yourself and not send it to the state. No, I want the people who are on the bottom of the ladder to move up. And that's what libertarianism is all about.
Yeah, and I know a really common and popular idea from libertarianism and libertarian values is, you first go to your family and your community when you need things and your other social structures like churches and synagogues, etc. And then you move to your state, and then you move to your local government, and then your state government, and then finally the federal government. And I feel like in these past decades, if not the past century, we've seen sort of that flip where people first go to the federal and state governments before they look to their, social structures. And then sort of with that, lots of people that identify with the two-party system, especially Democrats, will play to the convenience and emotions of voters. And I just want to know, why do you think that you're a better candidate, especially for college students, and what makes you attractive? What makes you more of an attractive candidate rather than just playing to the emotions of some of the voters out there?
Well, here's the biggest thing. College students are getting screwed by the federal government in both ways, okay? First way, what we've seen is when the federal government has been shoveling money into these schools, right? What's happened is the tuition and fees have skyrocketed. They have skyrocketed. And so all the people your age are coming out with horrible debt. And why are they doing it? Because they know that when you show up on campus and you're like, I can't afford that tuition. Oh, well, the government will sign a loan for me, right? They'll guarantee me that. You just have to pay this off, right? If universities were forced to create a product that students could afford without loans, there would be products that students could afford without loans. But you find this in it. Education is not any different. If you take solar panels and say the federal government will give you $2,500 per solar panel on your roof, guess what? The price goes up by $2,500, and they assume you're taking a loan. So what's happened is, and this is like, I really mean this, the federal government is borrowing and they're giving you large debts that your generation has to pay off in the future. And then they're giving you high debts in college, right? And this is creating a horrible structure for you. So your taxes have to be higher to pay off the debt the government's taking, and your personal expenses are higher because they've been subsidizing the college education. I mean, where else can you have a system where once you reach a certain path in life, in the university, you can never be fired regardless of what you say or you do? Like if I show up in one day and I say, I start killing people on my job, guess what? I'm going to get sued out of business, and I deserve to be sued out of business. But if you're a university professor and you stop teaching well, you stop performing well, and you tick everyone off, the professor can just say, I'm not interested. You can't fire me. Go to hell. This is wrong, right? And why I would stop doing all the support for the universities, and they would actually be forced to compete for you, and your tuition would be cheaper. You would come out with lesser loans. And guess what? There would be degrees. More people would go in degrees that actually pay something. And not these crazy degrees that are out there because, that don't serve any useful purpose. And I really feel bad for, people who don't have any concept of what happens after, because they go and they get these degrees and then they're like, well, I can't do anything with it, right? And then they come out with all the loans. So, the biggest thing that I would like to do with the universities is, for the most part, privatize them, because all they are is loading up on debt. And if they had to compete for your business, it would be cheaper.
Gotcha. So as we get into talks about your platform now, I want to continue along the lines of education. So if you become the governor of Utah, how are you going to be able to fix some of the privatization of schools, especially land grant schools like Utah State that were subsidized by the federal government, student loans that students receive that are, again, subsidized by the federal government? How would you be able to do something at the state level to, sort of compete with those federal programs?
Well, it would be really hard that to see on the baseline how I would do it. And I'd have to look at Utah law and state land grants. And, I'm going to do something that most politicians do. I haven't looked at that, so I really can't say. I can say what I would do on the primary education, K through 12. But, beyond the idea of privatizing the universities, or turn them into charities is which the most common thing to do. It's really hard to make them compete when the loans are all subsidized. You have actually universities that have done that. Like one of the schools that comes to mind that's done a fabulous job at this and competing for students and giving education at a reasonable price. You look at Canyon University in Arizona, and they have really been competitive. They tried to go it as a private university, but as you know, the last federal administration, the Obama administration, had something out for private universities. And so they found that it was better to turn it into a charity, and it was a change in name only. But the point that I'm making is that they've learned how to compete and deliver a superior product. And we don't have really anything like that in Utah, but we really should. And I think even if we today, with the stroke of a pen, made all the universities in the state of Utah private, what you'd see is that their tuition would go down almost instantly. And they would have to reform entirely how they pay their professors and stuff, which would be a good thing because they would have to get competitive.
So what do you say to the people that are trying to push, student loan forgiveness or free college education? What do you say to the people that want to promote that and put sort of that policy into action?
Well, there's nothing that's free. And so that's a myth. And then you saw in Europe, when they used to do that, what they found was that students stayed in university forever, right? And so they had to get rid of it. And almost everyone is now paying something for university now, even in Europe and places where they typically did. Loan forgiveness is a wonderful idea in concept, but then what it does, it penalizes everyone in front and behind you, right? So there's no such thing as being able to forgive the loans and think that it won't come back and bite you. And just like they say we want education to be cheap, well, loan forgiveness is like a giant subsidy. So all you know is that it's going to get more expensive. And then the loan forgiveness, what's going to happen is it's going to be done on a curve eventually, just like income taxes. And so let's say you unfortunately have a father that makes six-figure income. Well, you're going to get no loan forgiveness, and the person on the bottom will get a lot of loan forgiveness. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but the truth is that it won't be fair, and that will go forward. And instead of making it cheap and available for everyone, it'll again narrow it down, and it'll just end up being a disaster. And it'll make it really expensive, really, it just will.
I know another common argument is that if there are those people that choose to go to college and say, it is free or paid off by the state, then it's just going to end up on somebody else's taxes that they didn't choose to go to college. So,
the other thing that you didn't, and I'm not blaming for not bringing it up. Why in earth would you make a person who's a welder making $25 an hour pay for your education? Because that person didn't go to school. If you give every person in college loan forgiveness, which by the way is only about 20 to 25% of the population, everyone else finds out how to make a living without going to college, right? Why would you make everyone else pay for your education? That's completely morally bankrupt. They don't want an education. They can make it. My daughter's working at Amazon. Why should she pay for my son's education? Why should she pay for yours? That's essentially what they're asking you to do, which that's completely morally bankrupt.
Exactly. Now, moving on to another one of your platforms. I know earlier when you were talking about your medical career and how it sort of transformed your political views, one of the things you said is educate, not mandate. So where do you see some sort of libertarian principles within the healthcare system and in your healthcare plan? And what would you do to draw the line between like a single payer system and a completely private system? Where do you find yourself in that, what I'm looking for, spectrum?
Okay, so you have to remember that there are always going to be poor people, okay? They are not going away. You're always going to have homeless people. They are not going away. You're always going to have people that are going to be in need. They're not going away, okay? we have to find a way where we can take care of these people. Now, when my grandfather was a medical doctor in Utah, they had the Lions Club, and they would take care of these people, right? And they would raise money, and they would get together, and there would be large community organizations. Okay. At least in the short term, what we need to do is we need to take those existing structures that are for people below poverty, and we keep them with the safety net. There's nothing wrong with that. But we need to allow insurance companies, both in the state and across state lines, to purchase insurance plans that are tailored to your needs. And what you'll find is that the prices will go down. Whenever you create all kinds of mandates, what you find is that the prices go up. And I'm going to give you an example. I have in my office a bunch of people who work for me that are either men or they're postmenopausal. And they don't need to have coverage for birth. Yet I was paying maternity coverage for all of them under Obamacare because of their mandates. That doesn't make any sense. I'm happy to pay for maternity coverage for women in my office who meet that need, but mandating everyone do it, again, makes me pay for something that I both don't want or need, and it's always wrong. And so I would say I would find ways to let the free market take care of it. And there's lots of ways to do that, but that will drive down costs, because it always drives down costs, with the safety net. So, hey, I'll keep Medicaid for the people who are below the poverty line, right? But I would also allow insurance policies that are able to be bought across lines, right? So that meet your needs. And the flip side of that, and I will say this, the Trump administration has been trying to do this, is allow people to join in large organizations to buy collectives, to buy health insurance from insurers. So say the students of Utah State, you could just show up and you say, oh, for $200 a month, you get health care, because students at Utah State are pretty healthy. They don't need much, right? Or catastrophic coverage, things like that.
Yeah. Moving on now to energy. I know one of the things that you talk about is nuclear energy, and I know that you're a proponent of it. How do you plan to pursue this if you become governor of Utah, especially such an abject fear of it from people who say they're free energy and want solar and wind and geothermal energy, but refuse to talk about things like nuclear energy?
It's a hard thing. What it is that you would have to, as a governor, all that you could do is work with the legislature to look for impediments to buying energy from something like that. I physically can't make nuclear companies decide to come here, right? You have cities and municipalities that have power companies that are contracting with a nuclear plant being built up in Idaho at the INEL. That's supposed to come online here in like 3 or 4 years. I think that's a great thing. I would do whatever I can not to penalize that, right? The issue really is that how do you not play favorites? And I would try not to play favorites, but the truth is that if we're going to go to a solar and a wind powered world, sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow. So you need some type of thing like that. And so I would kind of just let the free market do it. There's no reason to pay really expensive prices for nuclear energy. It can compete, but I would try to remove the regulatory burdens if someone wanted to come here with a nuclear power plant. And some of these new designs that they have, like up in Idaho, they're talking about would work wonderfully in small localized areas within Utah or near the Wasatch Front. And it would help deliver this green new dream that people have of driving around electric cars without polluting the Wasatch Front.
And I know recently the nuclear energy has become a larger and larger thing to talk about, especially as California has tried to move more and more of their power grid to wind and solar, but not having the technical capacities yet to be able to store that energy. They've had the continuous rolling blackouts that they've had these past couple months. And so I know that people are trying to push nuclear energy, given that it's more clean, cheaper, and doesn't cost as much as solar and wind. So it's great.
That you have to remember is that the free market is delivering batteries. Like Tesla is delivering batteries to big solar and companies, right? But the government isn't doing it. Tesla did it all on their own, right? They didn't need to mandate improved battery technology. Elon Musk, when he decided to build an electric car, did not build an electric car because he knew he was just getting subsidies. He thought he could do it better, cheaper, faster, right? And if the state of California would just get out of the way and let people make energy, what they would find is that the market will drive all the coal companies out. Natural gas would take over for a short time. And then if they allowed nuclear energy to develop and sun and wind, what you'd find is very shortly, battery technology would keep up and we could have a very green economy. There wouldn't need to be one mandate involved.
Hopefully they can do that sooner than later because, Elon Musk already packed his bags and left. So hopefully they can change some of their policies before the energy companies do that as well. Another thing I want to talk about is your clemency program. I thought it really fascinating because clemency is not something we see talked about a lot. And I thought, creating another government program to sort of help facilitate that was interesting, especially coming from someone as a libertarian like yourself. So what are some of the crimes that you would eliminate enforcement for? And do you think that might fertilize bigger or worse crimes in the future?
Well, so here's the thing. The Utah governor, in compared to like other governors in other states, is a fairly weak office, meaning they don't operate a big clemency thing. They get to appoint people to the clemency board, okay? So I, as a governor, can't pardon someone on death row. I can take someone on death row and recommend them to the clemency board, okay? And I can appoint people to the clemency board, and I would appoint people who are libertarian and wanted to let people off for drug offenses, okay? So one of the things that I've always, and this is kind of a universal thing with libertarians, is that we believe the drug war is destructive to people, and it's destructive to economies, and it's destructive to the state, and it hurts most people of color and minorities. And so what I would do is I would simply recommend every single person with a nonviolent drug offense to the clemency board for full pardons for every single drug there is. It wouldn't matter whether it's a narcotic, whether it's methamphetamines, whether it was cocaine. It wouldn't matter whether it was 6 ounces, whether it was 1 pound. If it was a drug offense and it was not hurting anybody in the sense that they didn't kill someone, shoot someone, rape someone, beat someone up, then they can have a full pardon. And the point is that the drug war is silly, it's destructive, it's counterintuitive, right? And I'll give you an example. The official supply lines for fentanyl in an operation are well known, and I can buy it, and we know how to get it. Yet, if you go to Pioneer Park in Salt Lake, fentanyl is cheaper on the street of Salt Lake City than it is in the hospitals. Okay? So, despite the fact that they made it in China, they shipped it to Mexico clandestinely, they snuck it across the border, they drove it all the way up to Utah, all under the radar of the police, it's still cheaper to buy it on the streets than it is to buy it in a hospital. The drug war is a failure. Let's just regulate it like we do every other product. And what we'll find is the deaths will stop, the addictions will go down, we'll have no more drug addict, and we treat it like a medical problem, not a criminal thing. And about 60% of our jails are related to drugs crimes. So we'd actually save hundreds of millions of dollars by decreasing the amount of people in prison.
So I know a lot of states have policies in place where they delineate between personal quantities for drugs and then also drug quantities that would determine or insinuate that there's intention to distribute. Would you, you said that people that have, an ounce or a pound or whatever it may be, anybody that was a nonviolent criminal that had the drug offense would be granted clemency. Would you also afford that to people who were charged with intent to distribute?
Absolutely. I don't think that drugs and drugs possession and moving out is a criminal offense. I think, addiction is a medical problem, and these people are trying to solve the thing that most people don't understand is addicts don't want to die. They just want to get high, right? And so when we make the people who are giving them these drugs make it clandestine, all we do is decrease the purity of what they're getting, and it makes it more likely for them to die. And I am not about killing addicts just because the state has some wish. So I would just, pardon everyone. I don't want to pardon someone who murdered or beat someone up or something like that. But I don't, the addict wants to buy something. They just want to get high. I'm not turning him into a criminal. So I just would pardon everyone. If I could,
Gotcha.
I would recommend them to the board.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to education now. I know that one of the things that you talk about on your platform is incentivizing at-home or charter school type education so that we can remove kids from the public education system, which I know has become a great point of contention, especially since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. I found it was interesting that you would sort of give out, I believe it was $2,500 per student in the home. Is that correct?
At least that. And so here's that was probably the low thing. I think maybe it should be even more. I think the funding should follow the child, actually. And Utah spends $7,000 a kid, roughly, to educate them. And the interesting thing is that even with that amount, you look at our educational outcomes, and they haven't changed in the whole country in like 30 years, right? Or even longer. And so we keep on spending more money. We should change what we're doing. I have a friend whose daughter went to school in Sweden. 90% of the schools in Sweden are private. They compete for the dollars. And when he wanted his daughter to learn the French horn and get a pre-medical education, they developed specific curriculum for her. And there were numerous schools competing for her. And that's what we need we need the schools competing for our children's education, and you're going to see outcomes improve. But we all know that when you create a monopoly, monopolies by their very definition are inefficient. And I just have to say, if I had $7,000 and I gave it to per child for them to go out and buy educational services, I guarantee you they could buy all the educational services to teach their children in the home and have lots of money left over. And I find the Utah Constitution says that we have to give all our income taxes to education, yet anyone who's educated in the home out of that gets nothing, right? So it's disenfranchising people who choose to educate their children elsewhere. And what you would see is if we deregulated the school industry in the state and you saw competition, what we would do is develop the world's best home-based education network, right? Because you would see real competition between people for better outcomes, and it would happen really quickly. But what happens now is that all the people that live on the east side of Wasatch Front get their really nice public schools with the really good teachers, and everyone on the west side and in rural America gets no access to the fancy schools and the fancy after things activities. And so what we're doing is we're creating this horrible class structure that's unequal on its face, and yet we're trying to tell everyone that it's all the same. I want you to find the person that lives over on the west side that wouldn't say, oh, I want to go to Olympus High School, right? They all would. But they can't because they can't drive 45 minutes or an hour across town. But if you told them that you could get $7,000 of your expenses reimbursed, and sitting in your home, you could get the best English teacher that money could buy delivered right to your computer screen, why wouldn't you do that?
So back to that $2,500. I know that as a libertarian, you're trying to reduce the size of government to something that's not expansive and not all-consuming. Why, instead of a tax break, offer $2,500 per student?
Well, here's the biggest thing. The Utah Constitution says all our income taxes are collected and distributed for this. A tax break would be good, but I almost hate to mess with the simple flat tax. The one thing I will agree that the state of Utah has, at least right now, is a simple flat tax. That's fabulous. And as long as we're keeping that, I'm just going to give people money for the thing and buy good educational services rather than a tax break. When you fill out the tax forms, Utah's is wonderfully simple. So I would just leave it that way before I start tackling anything big like reforming the Utah Constitution or something like that.
Gotcha. I didn't know that Utah had a flat income tax, so I guess I know where I'm moving when I have a job.
Yeah, 5% flat, doesn't matter what it is. And the thing about it is it works out almost the same as if you lived in a no tax state like Texas, because their property taxes are so high and stuff like that. So it actually ends up 5% is a pretty good price to pay for state government, although it could be a lot lower.
Uh, Moving on now, there's something else I want to talk about that's been another outstanding point of contention, especially earlier in the 2010s. Why has cannabis, you think, been such a left-right issue? And what do you say to those who are anti-cannabis, but at the same time, they don't mind, keeping alcohol something that people can consume when they have, alcohol has much worse health effects than cannabis does?
Well, the funny thing is the most dangerous substances that we know are alcohol, tobacco, and opioids. Okay? That's more dangerous than methamphetamines. That's more dangerous than cocaine. That's more dangerous than all these other synthetic drugs that the kids are doing right now. So the funny thing about that is the most dangerous things are legal. And I just never have understood why anyone has a problem with marijuana, because it's so much safer. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek because almost nobody understands the concept of risk reduction. Okay. And risk reduction says that if smoking kills 10 people out of 100, and you make marijuana legal and a few people change over and marijuana, say for instance, killed 1 people out of 100, by allowing marijuana to be legal, you've saved lives, right? Most people can't understand that. What they think is that, well, tobacco kills 10 out of 100, marijuana kills 1 out of 100, then 11 out of 100 will die. Well, that's not the way things work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so hard. And this goes back to what I first said. The job of a government is to educate people and let them make their decisions, right? And I think that we've been able to do that with cigarettes. If you look at cigarettes, I want you to find me the smoker that doesn't know that cigarettes aren't deadly. But they've continued to choose to make it, and we've allowed them to do it, even though cigarettes are much more dangerous than cocaine. They're much more dangerous than opioids. They're much more dangerous than methamphetamines, yet we've somehow done that, right? So I'm not quite sure why the government's done such a bad job of teaching people about risk reduction, but they have, and this is always what I got back. The role of government is to educate people, not to force people. And, we should have gotten over this a long time ago, but we just haven't. I just, there's only been 1 state in the country that's allowed marijuana to become legal without a public referendum, right? So for some reason, the politicians are afraid and the people aren't, which is kind of always really bizarre to me.
Yeah, well, I think it was Reagan that said this, but the government isn't made to solve problems; it just reorganizes them. But before we move on, I want to ask one more question about the cannabis issue, specifically with the tobacco and alcohol we were just talking about. If you were to become governor, would you remove the sin tax from tobacco and alcohol products? I know that in states like California, the tax on the tobacco product itself is more than the cost of the actual product. Is that something you'd keep in place, or is that something you'd remove, similar along the lines of the clemency?
Well, I think that the government should be blind to the product, and it should be blind to who's purchasing it. So I think the taxes on tobacco and alcohol should be the same as anything else, as a car, as anything. So if I could, now you have to remember, the governor, I don't legislate, right? Along those lines, what I have said, and I pledged this on numerous times, I've said this, that if elected governor, I would not sign a single bill until a bill crosses my desk that ends the DABC. Do you know what the DABC is?
No.
It's the state-sponsored liquor stores.
Okay.
So you can't get any type of wine or liquor in the state unless you buy it through the state liquor store. And I was like, this is the dumbest thing ever. And so one of the things, it would have to end, or I would not sign another bill. I would simply just veto everything. I don't care whether the bill, whatever kind of great thing is going on, they would all be vetoed until the law passed that ends that. Now, if the Republicans got together with the Democrats, they could form a supermajority and override mine. Fine, you could do that, but nothing else. I just would continue to do this until this happened.
Gotcha. One other thing I want to talk about before we move on to some broader political issues and questions I have for you is your platform talks about ranked choice in voting. And you say that this will increase competition between candidates, and then it also have the winner of that election win a majority of the vote instead of a plurality. Why do you think that that's important?
Well, the way we set it up now is the two main parties get to be automatically in, and then everyone else has to work to get on the ballot. If you did ranked choice voting, I like it to economics. If you have a monopoly, your prices are always high. We get this. If you have two people, they find the prices only vary slightly, maybe about 5%. But if you have three things, and it works in almost any industry you look at, prices go down between 25 and 40%, right? So competition delivers better products at a lower price. The two main parties have just given us one version of this or another version of the same thing. If you don't have a third competition, you're getting crappy service. And I don't know very few people who don't admit that the political system sucks now. So we have to find a way to introduce competition, or we're still going to get a crappy political product. And ranked choice voting is a way to do that.
So on the same note, on the broader scale, would you say the same thing about the Electoral College? Because I know that you don't have to have a majority of the votes to win. You only need a majority of the Electoral College. In 2016, we saw Trump win, and he didn't win the popular vote by almost 3 million votes. Would you want to see something similar at the national level?
It's hard to say that because I understand the arguments with big states and small states, and that's just way over my pay grade. I like the question, but I've never thought about it, so I can't give you an intelligent answer.
I'll ask you again, maybe if you run for president. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are two other things I want to talk about before we move on to some broader questions, but still about some policy issues. They're just not necessarily discussed on your platform, on your website. The first is gun laws. What's your take as a libertarian on gun laws? I think I have a pretty general idea, but I just, let the viewer see it. But also, are you happy with Utah's gun laws? And then I want to get into some of your opinions on red flag laws and compensation and buybacks.
Okay, so I'm very happy with the Utah gun laws. I'm not, I'm very pro Second Amendment, and I don't have a problem with people owning firearms at all. The common thing is that guns kill people. People don't, people kill people. Guns don't kill people. And so, there is no correlation between gun ownership and murder rates. And we've seen this the world over. And so I'm just not bought into the idea that we need to highly regulate this in any way, shape, or fashion. I mean, if you want to stop people from owning automatic weapons without registering them, that's fine. But I just don't feel like, all these assault weapon bans and magazine capacity bans and all this stuff do anything but just get in the way of legal gun owners, because anyone who is using it for criminal purposes goes around all those things anyway.
Yeah. I know that I believe it was the 1994 crime bill, which Joe Biden was one of the signers of, banned assault weapons, but at the same time, you didn't see any decrease in the number of mass shootings. They'll say that there were, but then they just changed the definition of what a mass shooting was during that 10-year time period. And on a similar note, after Australia's one big mass shooting that they had, and they banned all weapons for the most part, you still saw violent crime. And in fact, it went up because it turns into knife crime and other forms of violent crime. So what's your take on red flag laws and then sort of gun confiscation and buybacks we are starting to see from other Democrat candidates aside from Biden, like, oh goodness, name skipping my mind, Beto O'Rourke. I know that he was very big on gun buybacks and confiscation and going door to door. What's your take on those sort of policies?
Well, Beto O'Rourke is funny because he came out with that after he ran for Senate in Texas, because, he could never win in Texas because Texas is like Utah. Everyone has guns, right? And so, I'm against all those forms of buybacks and things. I mean, like I said, people should be able to legally own firearms. And like you said, the murder rates don't change substantially. I mean, I think of the other country in the world where it has so many firearms is Switzerland. and yet they're not killing each other. So it's like, it's a cultural thing. It's not a gun thing. And we really need to be proactive in that, or creating good economies. That's also a big part of it, right? When you're rich and you have plenty of money, you're not fighting over stupid little things and killing each other. And then the other thing is that, Switzerland and those countries in Europe, they don't kill a lot of people because they're not fighting over all the drug turf as much, right? It's just, it's illegal, but it's not enforced, right? So they have a little interdiction, but nothing like we do here.
Something else I find interesting about the gun issue is that the United States is one of the only countries in the world that counts gun deaths or suicides by gun death as part of their larger gun deaths per year number, and that inflates it by somewhere about 30,000 deaths out of the total 40,000 there are each year. The next thing I want to talk about, again, that's not on your platform, but it's another hot button issue, is the topic of pro-life versus pro-choice. Do you think that Utah has, as far as libertarian ideas and policies go, do you think that you're happy with Utah abortion laws, or where would you like to see those go?
I'm pro-life, and Utah's not going to change their mind about that. I'm up for people arguing back and forth about it. I think laws always follow what the people believe. And so I really feel like everywhere else in the world has come to a consensus. It's only the United States that's arguing about this. And it's really funny because you go to Europe, they've already made their mind up. And, we share abortion laws with China and North Korea. That shows you the company we are in. So everywhere you go in Europe and India and other places, that once you reach the age of viability, which is somewhere about 23 weeks, no one allows an abortion. They said, you should have made your mind up by now. If you want to give the child up for adoption afterward, fine, but you get to make your choice before then. Now, the other thing about that is that society has come to that thing, even in all the Catholic countries over there, like Italy and France and stuff, very Catholic places. In an ideal world, I think we should do something like that. But, I don't know that you want to spend a lot of money fighting about this like some of the states do. It seems like silliness to me. We don't need to make a statement, and it's easier to ban late-term abortions and stuff like that, and just let the other people spend their money unwisely and trying to make a statement. So I'm pretty happy where Utah laws are right now. It's legal and people can get it. And so would I like it at the age of viability? Sure, like the rest of the world, but I wouldn't spend tens of millions of dollars of the state's money to try to make a small move one way or the other.
Yeah, and that's just a question I wanted to ask because I know it's been a really hot button issue for a really long time, but especially now that we have that 9th seat open on the Supreme Court and we're looking at maybe having Amy Coney Barrett nominated, we might start to see that become, a larger issue, and hopefully we'll get to see some action change on that and sort of see where that goes. Something else I want to talk about now that is something you talked about right at the beginning of this was how Utah handled the COVID pandemic. So I want to know, how do you think Utah performed compared to other states?
Well, we've performed very well, but here's the point. We don't really control COVID. COVID controls us. And I think the biggest problem that people have missed in the pandemic is that the state government actions and the federal government actions all across the entire world have had no impact on COVID. And we've been blaming the Republicans or blaming the Democrats or blaming this. They really have not changed the curve anywhere. And you can go look at the curves and say, they did this intervention, they did that intervention. The only thing that could possibly change the curve is to get a vaccine. And maybe we're close to that, maybe we're not. But beyond a vaccine, and you don't know if it's going to work or not, or work very well, but beyond a vaccine, the state governments have no impact, masks have had no impact, social distancing has had no impact, and lockdowns have had no impact. And so I think we have overestimated our power to control this virus. And because of that, we've been running around pointing at fingers wrongly instead of just focusing on learning ways to better treat people who are infected, which is what the government could do. It's spreading that information around what they're doing, how they're doing it, and make sure that it gets disseminated so we do a better job of treating the people who get it rather than focusing on stopping it, which no one's been able to do.
Yeah, and it's at the same time both been fascinating, but also really disappointing to see the narrative go from all we have to do is flatten the curve so that we can get our medical supplies at the level that they need to be, and then that turned into crushing the curve, and now that's turned to if you go outside and you're not wearing a mask, you're going to kill grandma. So sort of along the lines of what you're saying, what would you have done from the beginning to sort of mitigate COVID's reaction throughout Utah, and at the same time, what would you do now that's different from what's going on currently?
So the biggest thing that I would do is give actual good medical information out to everyone in the entire state. What they've been doing has been giving out really crappy information, and all it's done is scaring people. I've also put out relative risk index so people could help learn what the risk factors are, in the sense that, hey, is this more dangerous or less dangerous than driving down I-15? Is it more dangerous or less dangerous than skiing? And they're giving none of that information, nor are they giving the underlying medical conditions of everyone that dies. So my administration would be focused on education of the people and disseminating information rather than telling them what to do. Because I like to tell people, when Ebola hit Nigeria, everyone all on their own without any government interaction, social distance, cleaned up their act and crushed the curve without a single government mandate, because people don't want to die, right? It doesn't take a government edict for people to change their behavior. And if you educate people, they can make risk assessments all on their own. But we're doing a very poor job, and that's what I would change most.
So along those lines of educate, not mandate, like with your healthcare platform.
Right. Educate, not mandate.
Gotcha. One other thing, you talked about a vaccine. Pfizer, one of the leading companies that's been pursuing a vaccine, the company that makes Purell, one of the people, I believe they're on their board, said that they could have a vaccine out and rolling before the end of October. Do you think that a vaccine is going to be critical, or do you think it's something that's not going to really help us return to normal at all?
Well, here's the thing. I think it will help us return to normal. And the reason I say that is because we have unnecessary fear of this virus. And, why we're even testing kids for this, I have no earthly idea. They're not going to die from it. And so, honestly, I don't think people will feel comfortable going out until we get a vaccine. Even if I disagree with that, and I disagree with masks, and I disagree all these things, the truth is that people aren't going to feel comfortable. So I hope they get a vaccine out. I really do, because it'll allow us to return. People feel comfortable with the flu, and flu sometimes in 2000 killed like 90,000 people, and we didn't change our behavior at all. And so we artificially think we know the flu when actually it's very dangerous. And we're unrationally fear of COVID because we don't have a vaccine. They will learn to ignore COVID when there's a vaccine, even though the risk may or may not change.
Do you think some of that irrationality is due to it being politicized? And if so, who do you think was the one that politicized it, and to what end? What was the purpose behind doing that?
Well, it's hard to get away from politics in anything. And, the it's been politicized. There's no way around that. Anything Trump has done has been wrong. And so I think Trump has done some, good things on the vaccine front in terms of reducing the regulatory burden. But, you can't do anything in Washington without someone calling you a murderer. So I don't know how anyone gets around that. I mean, I am not a Trump fan, but what he's done for the vaccine and reducing the regulatory burden at the CDC and the FDA once the pandemic had already been going has been good. And I do think that it will help people get out. And I don't know what else will. I mean, I just don't. I wish it was different, but people are afraid of this for not rational reasons.
So along a broader spectrum now, outside of Utah, how do you think the Trump administration handled COVID?
Well, that backs to my thing is that I don't think he could have done anything different. It was going to happen the way it happened, no matter what. So, I give everyone the exact same grade. So they couldn't have done anything, except for maybe the 3 states in the Northeast who actually put the COVID patients in the nursing homes, which killed off a lot of older people that were honestly in the last 2 years of their life anyway. And I don't like to say it that way, but it's true. So the deaths were artificially sped up, but their life expectancies were all very short. So I don't really give anyone a bad grade. I'm like, there's no right way to do this because it's going to spread no matter what.
Again, on the same lines, what's your opinion on the CARES Act? I know that it was a really controversial bill that got passed, especially since they were one of the causes that paid people more in unemployment than they'd be making at their job in the first place, and how that would disincentivize returning to employment. So what was your take on that?
Well, here's the thing. The government created the recession out of thin air. And so I'm not so against that. The truth is that a hardcore libertarian might say, well, this is part of life. But the truth is that these are real people with real things. And, we should just go on with it, let people have a little bit of money. But, we should pull back on everything. If everyone feels comfortable going back to work and wearing a mask, let's all wear a mask and go back to work and get on with it, right? Because, we can't throw money at the problem like this and think it's going to go away. People have to go back to work, so we have to find a way to be comfortable. And honestly, I wear a mask when I go around. I don't believe in them, but I don't want people to feel uncomfortable. And if the business owner wants me to wear a mask, sure, I'll wear a mask. Let's just all get back to being people again, right?
Yeah. There's one last question I want to ask. We're running out of time here, so I have to wrap it up, unfortunately. But what are some of the shows you watch and the books you read where you get some of your inspiration from? And who are some of your, ideological role models as far as where you get your political beliefs from?
Well, I'll tell you, my big hero that's alive is Don Boudreaux at the Mercatus Center at the University of Virginia. I think he's just spot on. It's always funny how the free market is the most charitable thing, and even though everyone calls it awful, it's like the most charitable, the most giving, lifts more people out of poverty, and delivers more goods cheaper than any government program ever. And so that's one of the big things. I mean, obviously Milton Friedman is also one of my big heroes. And as a jurisprudence, I just love Clarence Thomas. I just can't tell you enough when the man got up and said, you can't solve racism by being racist, right? And that's the beauty of libertarianism. I literally don't care who you're sleeping with. I literally don't care the color of your skin. I literally don't care where you go to church, right? It is a non-issue to me. And until we realize that the role of government isn't to pick winners and losers, but to deliver a service regardless of who you are, we're always going to be arguing over scraps, which is always poor, right? And so what have I been reading lately? I've been reading a lot about American Indian history. I just find it's been fascinating. Especially like lately, I've been reading about the Sioux. And before that, I read about the Creeks and the Seminoles and the Cherokees, and I still have no idea why I decided to start reading those histories, but they've been good. I was a history major in college, and it's one of those things I've always gravitated towards. And the saddest part about all that is that you realize how life is just a series of circles, and pandemics are going to come, and they're always going to come, and they're going to keep coming. And we've done so poorly on this one. Hopefully we can learn from this and not make the same dumb mistakes again, right? Because there's a big difference between smallpox and COVID. And COVID is chump change compared to smallpox, right? And COVID is chump change compared to Ebola. And we've just blown it all out of proportion, and we need to find a way to keep our heads, stay sane, and carry on with life, right?
Of course. Well, Dr. Cottam, I want to thank you, but before you go, we just want to ask super quick, where can we find you online if we want to read more about you?
CottamforUtah.org is the big, my website, or on Facebook. I love posting articles on Facebook about qualified immunity, which we didn't get into, which is a big one with I have African-American children. And so that's a big one. And lots of some funny snippets and things like that. You can see what I'm thinking about, and education, and how we would do things. So the Facebook page under my name for governor, and then CottamforUtah.org.
That's great. Well, once again, Dr. Cottam, we want to thank you for joining us. This has been the Utah State University Statesman.